Greetings from love, lies, and deception. Discover the tales and mysteries of adultery with me, Emily. Though life is complicated and doesn't always follow clear rules, I have always believed in simple truths. Sincerity in relationships is the foundation of everything. Honesty always wins, and love conquers all. However, last year I did something I never thought I was capable of, cheating on my husband, a man I loved and respected. This is a narrative of passion, guilt, love, and self-destruction. It is full of surprising twists that will alter your perspective on dedication and loyalty when you wake up at 6 in the morning. I am a university professor, and my student became the one who completely upended my life. It's easy to get caught up in routine under such circumstances. My husband John, a software engineer, is busy with his projects and rarely pays attention to how I'm feeling in the evenings. One day, I was getting ready for a lecture on modern literary trends when I noticed a new student standing at the entrance, looking around uncertainly. He was tall, athletic, and had deep-set eyes. His gaze briefly met mine, and in that moment, something clicked inside of me. "Hello, I'm Nick," he introduced himself and approached me after the lecture. "I apologize for being late. I just transferred." "No worries," I smiled. "The important thing is that you're here now. Welcome in the following weeks." Nick often came to me with questions after classes. His questions were deep and thoughtful, which won me over. Gradually, a mutual respect and interest developed between us. We began to communicate, not only within the framework of lectures, but also outside the university. Nick was passionate about literature, and I saw something more in him than just a student. He was passionate, sincere, and this drew me to him. One day, after another discussion at his place, I felt that our friendship was crossing the boundaries of ordinary teacher-student communication. We were sitting in his cozy apartment talking about follow-works, when he suddenly fell silent and looked into my eyes. "Emily," he said quietly, "I've wanted to tell you something for a long time." What I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster. "I like you a lot, and I can't hide it anymore." I froze. We were sitting so close that I could feel his breath on my face. For a moment, I felt a surge of fear and guilt, but then that moment was replaced by excitement and desire I couldn't resist. Nick slowly moved closer, and our lips met in a kiss. It wasn't just a kiss, but an explosion of emotions I had been holding back for a long time. His lips were soft, and his hands wrapped around my waist, pulling me closer. I lost track of time. We were consumed by each other, and the whole world disappeared around us in that kiss. I felt all the passion and love I had been missing for so long. At that moment, I realized that I could no longer ignore my feelings. When the kiss ended, we sat in silence, breathing heavily. I couldn't believe what had happened. "Nick," I whispered, "it's incorrect. I'm married." "I know," he said, "but I can't deny how I feel." We sat for a long time thinking about what had happened, and even though I knew that this meeting had changed everything, I knew that I wanted to be with Nick. The story I was going to tell is not simple. It is full of passion, pain, guilt, and difficult decisions, but it is my story, and I want to share it with you. After that kiss, I couldn't stop thinking about Nick when I got home. John, as usual, was preoccupied with his work and didn't seem to notice my turmoil, but I felt strange every time I saw Nick. My heart would race, and it was difficult to concentrate on my lectures. I knew I should avoid him, but every time our eyes met, I felt an invisible connection between us. A few days later, Nick approached me again after class, inquired in a worried-sounding voice. I nodded and advised that we go outside to avoid drawing undue attention. We then made our way to a little bench in the park next to the campus and took a seat. He started, "I can't stop thinking about you. I am aware. I can't deny my feelings, even though it's wrong." I let out a sigh. "I feel the same way, Nick. Manner, but we don't have a future. I have a spouse." My heart shook as he gazed at me with such affection and sadness in his eyes. "I have kids." "I know, but I can't just forget about you. Perhaps we can figure something out." I'm crying, but I'm not sure, Nick. It's too difficult. Nick touched my hand gently after we sat in quiet for a few minutes, both of us immersed in our own thoughts. I gazed at our joined fingers and understood that I was about to make a decision that would change my entire life. "I'll think about it," I eventually responded, and the following few days went by in a daze. "Emily, I'm prepared to do anything for you." Please give us a chance. I tried to be normal, but I couldn't help but think of Nick. One evening after a particularly trying day, I made the decision to take a stroll, even though I knew it wouldn't be an easy one. I was strolling through the empty streets of our peaceful suburb when I abruptly saw Nick standing in the shadows. He appeared to be waiting for me, Emily, and as I approached him, he spoke softly. Nick, I felt my heart begin to race as I knew you would arrive. Who are you? Why are you here? There was no more waiting for me. He responded, I needed to see you. As he walked toward me, his eyes glowed in the darkness, and I sensed our magnetic connection once more. Nick, I whispered, we can't keep doing this, but you want this as much as I do. His voice was passionate, and I was undoubtedly silent because I didn't know what to say. Inside me, a fire was burning that I could no longer contain. Nick gently touched my cheek, and I felt his warmth penetrate me. Please don't push me away, he said, and there was a plea in his voice I couldn't resist. We found ourselves in each other's arms again, and this kiss was even more passionate and deeper than the first. We kissed for a long time, forgetting about everything in the world, his hands wrapped around my waist, pulling me closer, and I responded to his kisses with equal passion. When we broke away from the kiss, I realized that my life would never be the same. Nick stood beside me, his eyes burning with a fire I hadn't seen in years. He took my hand, and without saying a word, he led me to his home. We walked through the deserted streets, each step bringing us closer to the moment when we could surrender to passion without restraint. As soon as we entered the apartment, Nick shut the door and pressed me against the wall. His lips met mine again in a greedy, insatiable kiss. I felt his hand slide down my back. Finding every sensitive spot, he was insatiable, and I responded with equal fervor. We couldn't wait any longer. He lifted me into his arms and carried me to the bedroom. On the bed, our bodies merged into one, and I felt a wave of passion overwhelm us both. Nick began undressing me slowly, but decisively. Each touch to my skin, as if it were the last, I lay before him, completely exposed and vulnerable. And he looked at me with such tenderness and desire that it took my breath away. Nick pressed against me, and our bodies moved in a unified rhythm. Each kiss was like fire. We moved together, forgetting everything else. Our bodies and souls were one. We were like a cyclone, sweeping everything in our way. Our bodies blazed with passion, and every kiss and touch was like a fire that got brighter. I felt his hands glide down my back, and I was overcome with an unfathomable ecstasy. Nick was insatiable, and I matched him with equal intensity. His movements were confident and passionate, and I felt waves of pleasure wash over me one after another. I looked into his eyes, and at that moment, nothing existed between us but pure, all-consuming passion. I moved in harmony with him. Our bodies merged in a single rhythm, and I felt a wave of ecstasy enveloping us both. When we finally reached the peak, I felt a wave of pleasure engulfed us both. We lay in each other's arms, breathing heavily, and I felt his heart beating next to mine. It was a moment of complete intimacy. When we were inseparably connected to each other, we lay in silence, and I realized that I had taken a step into the unknown, but at that moment, I knew I had no regrets. Nick was beside me, and I was ready to face all challenges with him. When our breathing turned to normal, Nick looked at me with tenderness. Emily, you have no idea how happy I am that you're here, he whispered, pulling me closer. I smiled and felt tears of joy fill my eyes. I agree, Nick. I agree, I answered, and I knew then that I had made the right decision. The following morning, I woke up in Nick's arms, his hand resting gently on my waist, his breathing steady and quiet. I looked at him and felt a rush of joy, but right after that, I realized what I had done. I carefully got out of bed so as not to wake Nick, and I walked quietly out of the bedroom, passing the mirror, where I caught a glimpse of my reflection and wondered, what had I become? An instructor? A mom? A wife and a traitor at the same time? My mind was shattered. After getting dressed and leaving the apartment quietly, I headed home. I tried to think of something to say to John, but there weren't many that seemed appropriate. When I opened the door to our house, John was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the kids. Good morning, he said with a smile. Did you go out? The day went by according to my usual routine, but my thoughts were far from everyday worries. I kept thinking about Nick and how he held me, and how our bodies blended into one. At one point, I felt that I could no longer handle this tension, so I sent him a message that said, "I can't stop thinking about us." I wrote and sent it, and the response arrived promptly. "Emily, I agree. When can we meet up?" We made plans to meet that evening once more. Nick proposed that we meet at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city where we wouldn't be recognized when I got there. Nick looked tense, but his eyes brightened with excitement when he saw that we were sitting at a table in the corner and started talking. "Emily, I know this is difficult," he said, "but I can't live without you. What are we going to do?" Nick groaned, "I'm not sure." We sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I knew I had to make a decision, but it seemed impossible until Nick reached out and gently touched my hand. "No matter what happens, I will always be here for you," he said, his voice full of genuine concern. I looked into his eyes and realized that, despite everything, I couldn't let him go. I whispered, and we spent the rest of the evening together discussing our feelings and what lay ahead for us. Nick suggested that we wait and see how things would play out. We both understood that we would have to be careful not to raise suspicion. When I got home, Jan was already asleep, so I lay down next to him, feeling guilty. I knew I couldn't continue living in such tension, but I couldn't give up Nick. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but thoughts of the future kept me awake. The next day, I met Nick again. We agreed to be cautious and meet only when it was safe. We knew it would be difficult, but we were ready to make any sacrifice for our love. In the following weeks, we continued our secret meeting. Every moment spent together was filled with passion and tenderness, but along with that grew the guilt I felt toward Jen and the children. Knew I couldn't live in such tension forever, but I didn't know how to escape this labyrinth of feelings. One evening, when I returned home after meeting Nick, John was sitting in the living room watching TV. He looked tired and pensive. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, and I felt my heart clench with fear. Jay's words echoed in my mind, and I felt my heart clench with fear. I knew this was the moment of truth, the moment I had feared and avoided. There was no point in hiding the truth any longer. John deserved to know the truth, and I owed it to myself to be honestly. I took a deep breath and walked over to the couch where he was sitting. His face looked tired and slightly weary. We were silent for a few seconds, and the tension was palpable. "John," I started out softly, my voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." He gave me a worried look, so I said, "What happened?" "Emily, you seem distressed." I took a deep breath and summoned all my strength to tell you the truth, because I've been living a lie for the past few months, and I can't go on like this. "John, I cheated on you." His face went white, and he froze as though he couldn't believe what he was saying. His voice trembled. I felt the tears welling up again. "I met someone and fell in love with them." He remained silent for a while, taking in what he had heard, and his eyes showed a mix of disappointment, rage, and anguish. "What's the duration of this?" he continued, his voice cold. "For a few months," and I responded honestly, not wanting to lie to you, but not knowing how to communicate the truth. "You didn't want to harm me," he repeated with a sour smile. "Emily, do." I didn't want to hurt. He got up and started to pace the room nervously. "You are aware of your actions. Our family has been ruined by you." Tears were streaming down my face. "I know, John, I know, and I'm prepared to take responsibility for my actions, but I can no longer live a lie." John paused and gave me such a painful look that I wanted to vanish. "I love you, Nick, and I can't deny it." "Who is he?" he inquired quietly, and I acknowledged that he was one of my students. "His name is Nick, John." He shook his head as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You cheated on me with your student, Emily." "How could you do that?" I stayed silent, unsure of what to say, and I could feel the distance between us widening. At last, John sighed and gave me a tired look. "I'm not sure how to respond to you betraying me and our family." Jen remained silent and simply walked into another room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my guilt. I sat on the couch, feeling torn apart inside, knowing that I had taken the right step, but it didn't make the pain any less. I whispered, "How can we continue after this?" But I knew that I couldn't live a lie any longer, and that I needed to be honest with you and myself. I loved Nick, but I also respected and loved John. I faced a difficult period ahead. and I didn't know what awaited me the next day. I met with Nick and told him about my conversation with John. Nick was shocked, but supportive. We understood that we now had to be very careful and patient. "We get through this," Nick said, holding my hand. "We'll find a way to be together." I nodded. Feeling his support gave me strength. Difficult decisions and hard times awaited us, but I knew we could get through it. Altogether, the next day, John informed me that he had filed for divorce. He didn't want to see me around and asked me to leave as soon as possible. I had to pack my things and find temporary accommodation for the first few days. I stayed with a friend, trying to sort out my feelings and plan my next steps. Nick was there supporting me, but I understood that I needed to get my life in order before we could start a new chapter together. John and I agreed to meet to discuss the details of the divorce and custody arrangements for the children. The meeting was tense and painful. John looked tired and disappointed. "I can't believe you did this," he said, avoiding my gaze, "but I want our children to suffer as little as possible. So we need to come to an agreement." I nodded, agreeing with him. "I understand. And I will do everything possible to ensure our children are happy." We discussed the details of the divorce and agreed on joint custody of the children. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the only way to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the children's sake. After the meeting, I moved in with Nick. It was challenging at first to adjust to the new lifestyle, but Nick was attentive and caring. He helped me cope with the guilt and supported me through difficult moments. One evening after the children had gone to bed, Nick and I were sitting on the terrace of his apartment. He looked at me tenderly and said, "Emily, I know this hasn't been easy, but I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." I smiled, feeling his words warm my heart. "Thank you, Nick." After a few months, life slowly began to settle down, and I'm not sure what I would have done without you. I got a new job, and the kids were getting used to the new house and situation. Jan and I tried to keep our relationship cordial for the kids' benefit, but it wasn't easy. One evening after a long day, I was sitting on the terrace with Nick, thinking back on everything we had been through. I said in a low voice, "Emily, life sometimes throws us unexpected turns, but I believe we can handle anything." Nick took my hand and looked into my eyes. "The fact that we're together is what matters, Nick." I felt happy, tears welling up. "I appreciate all you've done." As the years went by, and our lives became more stable and happy, Nick and I continued to support one another, and our love only grew stronger with each day. Looking back, I realized that my journey had been full of mistakes and challenges, but it had led me to a happiness and love I had never known. I was grateful for all the lessons life had taught me and for the opportunity to start anew. Now, sitting on the terrace of our home, I felt that I had finally found my place in this world. It wasn't a perfect place, but it was real, and that was the most important thing.